The Russian army shows low morale and a lack of direction. But there's something else at the moment. The Russian army must realize it is literally repeating the failures of the past, the failure particularly of the 1979 invasion of Afghanistan, when the Kremlin parachuted people into Afghanistan and expected Kabul to fall within a matter of days, and it didn't. And the Afghans mounted a very ingenious guerrilla warfare for years and wore the Russians down to the point where they retreated. And much the same sort of scenario may be present in Ukraine, though it's much more conventional warfare. And there is great danger connected to Ukraine. Afghanistan was a largely agrarian society, and unfortunately, there was a lot of poor education, which meant that people went down to Pakistan and were prey to the Wahhabi extremists, which gave rise to the Taliban, something we are reaping the whirlwind there. I don't think that's a scenario we're going to see with Ukraine. Ukraine is a much more Western society, and its strategy and its understanding of warfare is much more advanced than that of Afghanistan. But Russia has not advanced. Russia is in the same place. Russia thinks by sending more bombs, it's simply going to blow the smithereens out of Ukraine and blow people into negotiating on its terms. Well, it's not going to happen, I'm afraid. I think we should be talking to Putin. I think we should be talking to Putin, not to his poodles. But at the same time, I think we need to be realistic. This conflict could go on for a lot longer. It could spread. It could spread in a most alarming and very quick way, well over the whole of Europe, if we're not careful. Putin is desperate. Of course, Putin wants us to talk, and we should do that at speed and at the top level. But at the same time, we should support Ukraine as much as we possibly can. We also need to continue to provide the best resources to Ukraine, the best intelligence, top-level training, because that alone will counter the Russian numbers. At the same time, we mustn't demonize Russia. Russia is not to blame for Putin's madness. This is Putin's problem and his Kremlin. It's not the problem of the many, many millions of Russians who are sitting at home tuning into their radio and television sets and who are being fed propaganda and dubbed interviews. I know all about dubbing. It happened to me. It happened to me on a television station called NTV at least once. It may have happened more often. But at least once I had the evidence. And it was a futile, pointless interview. But if they can do it to me, they can do it to somebody who is significantly more important. And I'm sure they do. And I'm sure the people in the villages believe everything they hear. And that is the problem. And we have not challenged that in the West. We think that's a Russian problem. It isn't, it's our problem. We have as much of a job to do in fighting the propaganda machine as we do in supporting and aiding Ukraine on the battlefield and protecting Ukrainian civilians. The onslaught against civilians is criminal. Whatever negotiations take place need to recognize that Putin is the invader, that Putin is the aggressor, that Putin has attacked ordinary people, that Putin has attacked food and oil and basic supplies, that Putin has made our lives across the globe worse for his greed. And like Mrs. May, Putin thinks that a bit of paperwork is going to solve his problems, that by defining countries as Russian, they are de facto Russian. What utter tosh. Utter tosh. This is something, as I say, of the madness of Mrs. May. Something dreamt up while she was running around in the wheat fields. Mrs. May thought that Brexit can be sorted out by playing around with words on paper. No, words define reality. And people who don't understand that get into trouble. Putin got into trouble because at the core, he doesn't understand that words and reality must cohere. You can't have a word which means something that you want it to mean if the rest of the world thinks something else, if the rest of the world thinks it means something else. No, a word is a shared concept. And if we're not speaking the same language, or if we're not using the word in the same way, then we are running into trouble. So, happy Boxing Day.